How has nobody else figured it out yet? I can spot my own incompetence from a mile away. My days are numbered and it's only a matter of time before I am flushed out of the system. Hopefully you've never uttered these words to yourself in moments of weakness, but sadly, the odds are not in our favor. Happy New Year, everyone. I'm Jack Wang, and if it's your first time here, we talk about science, technology, education, and careers. In January, the channel theme is fresh starts, entering the new year with clarity to avoid unforced errors this time around. It seems like there's no greater unforced error than the imposter syndrome. The most systematic review I could find was from 2019, covering 62 studies of over 14,000 people. It's not an official psychiatric disorder, there is no standardized way of diagnosing it, and it strongly overlaps with anxiety and depression. It's very meta, feeling like an imposter talking about the imposter syndrome because I'm a microbiologist, not a cognitive psychologist, but currently there is no obvious evidence-based way of treating the imposter syndrome. What we can and should do though is talk about it to raise awareness by talking about our own experiences. Today, let's touch on 3 different phases of the imposter syndrome as we progress through our career and how to reinvent ourselves using a 3-stage uncertainty framework. The imposter syndrome, where you feel like a fraud despite all external accomplishments and evidence to the contrary, is very common and pervasive. You need to become a loose acquaintance with the idea of being an imposter, popping in every now and then for a quick catch-up to draw motivation and inspiration, then saying bye to them for as long as you can. While the imposter syndrome is largely intrinsic and internal to you, it has to be temporary for it to hold any value. If it's a permanent sense of dread, you should either seek medical advice and or try to remove the negative external influences from your life. Today, let's touch on 3 different phases of the imposter syndrome as you progress through your career and how to beat them through reinvention. But first, let's acknowledge that students, undergraduate students in particular to university, are vulnerable to feelings of inadequacy and anxiety as well, probably more than anyone. The difference though is that most students haven't yet accomplished that much because you're just getting started. Outside of family or peer pressure, people shouldn't have that many expectations of you while you're studying. In fact, you have the opposite problem. No one thinks you have any value. And if I had $1 every time I hear people complain about students and millennials on their phones eating avocado on toast, I don't want to minimize your sense of insecurity as an undergraduate student, but it is quite distinct from the imposter syndrome, which only really kicks in phase 1, rookie jitters, after you find your first job. As an undergraduate student, your problems are mostly your own to deal with. If you do well, you are the one rewarded. If you struggle, you suffer the most negative consequences out of anyone. That dynamic shifts when you join a new team, business, or company in a new job because your failures start to affect those around you. Peers, your manager, your company's bottom line. So the pressure mounts very quickly. Everyone else seems like they know so much more than you, but it's only because they've had time to figure things out on their own. Hopefully there's a grace period. You're the newbie, so someone should be there to make sure you know how to set things up first time around the right way, if you're lucky. But what happens when this grace period runs out? For me, this was the first year of my PhD. People were definitely around to make sure I knew how to update the right spreadsheets, be part of cleanup rosters, not drink any dangerous chemicals or break really expensive machinery or equipment. After that, I needed to figure the rest out by myself. To reinvent yourself at this stage, from brand new rookie to valued member of the team, you will need to walk through a 3-stage uncertainty framework. 1, the Googleables. 2, the Mentionables. And 3, the Untouchables. The Googleables is self-explanatory. It's things you can find out by yourself in your own time on Google. Well, not just Google, but Wikipedia or Reddit, discussion forums, YouTube videos, news articles, academic literature. The longer you spend on this stage and the wider the net you cast, the easier the next 2 stages will be. Most of the people who hit the ground running in their first job already do this. They've done a ton of background research by themselves in their own time. This is easier said than done though, because how do you know the right questions to ask when you're a newbie or the right search terms? This won't be a one and done situation. You'll need to revisit the stage over and over again as you're given new duties and responsibilities to manage over time. 2, the mentionables, questions that you can't find the answers to independently, but feel comfortable enough mentioning casually over, say, a coffee with your fellow team members or colleagues. Hey, why are we working with this client? They seem very demanding. Oh, it's because they bring in so much money for the firm. Got it. Hey, why is it so hard to book this piece of equipment? Oh, it's several $100,000 and we have to share this with 5 other research groups. So make sure it's always clean and in working order once you're finished. Okay, got it. Hey, what's a good time to go on leave that doesn't make everyone else's job twice as hard? This is also how you build a professional network, slowly but surely building people's trust. And the quicker you understand the social norms and the unwritten rules of etiquette in your workplace, the quicker you will shed your rookie or imposter status. 3, the untouchables. Untouchable questions that only the head honcho, your manager, or your boss's boss should really be able to answer. What's the direction of this company? How does the work we're doing today affect your vision for the next 5, 10, 20 years? How's the work we're doing different than our competitors? And how do you see my role changing over time? Do I have room to grow in this area? Now, these are called the untouchables for a reason, because no one really expects the rookie to be asking the manager hard-hitting questions. But these are things you should have in the back of your mind. If you're ever in a situation where you've done an incredible job, landed a big client or finished a big project, published a big paper, you might want to cash in a little bit of your career capital, the trust that your manager now has in you, to ask one of these questions, because it's the answers to these questions that will propel you into phase 2 out of the box. Once you've been doing your job for a while, you'll get better at it. If you're in an average, non-toxic workplace, after a year or so, I'd be very surprised if you still felt like an imposter. If you do, I think that says more about your workplace than you, and you should either speak to someone about improving your mental health and or find a different workplace. Because at this point, your duties should no longer be a mystery. You should have a clearly laid out routine, Monday through to Friday, and this is totally fine. In fact, it can be great. For most people, a job is a job, and work-life balance is fantastic in theory, because this so-called comfort is dangerous in the current economy. Large enterprises are not in the business of rewarding individual employees. They're in the business of developing systems that can replace any employee. If your job description is a little too clear and everything you do is itemizable on a spreadsheet, how certain are you that all the things you do are still going to be valuable in 5 years' time? Try this exercise. Write everything that you do at your job for a whole week into a spreadsheet, or let's say a whole month, and tabulate which of these can be given to someone else to do, let's say with 2 weeks or a month of training, and it then no longer becomes your job. Now, if you work in a field that's very hard to get into, with say 10 years of training needed as a prerequisite, you might feel a little safer, but even then, there's tens of thousands of doctors and lawyers graduating every single year. Can you be so sure that you'll still be rare and valuable, and that this value will continue in perpetuity? It all sounds quite heartless, and you hear terrible stories about redundancies after 20 years of service at the same company, but you really can't take this personally. It's just the way of the market. So as individuals, we have to protect ourselves from being too well defined. To be put into a box or to be reduced down to a list of replaceable duties is to start the countdown on when your stock will begin to drop. The only way I know how to break out of this is to reinvent yourself by always trying to find a new skill that will redefine your value. As soon as you start thinking about branching out though, the imposter comes knocking. You're so tired after work, you don't have time to think or learn new things. What will your family think? What will your boss or colleagues think? Maybe it's a stupid idea after all, and you're not so sure if it's worth your time. So let's go back to our 3-stage uncertainty framework. The Googleables. This is where I would invest the vast majority of your time at this phase. There is so much that you can learn purely online that it's honestly staggering. Computer programming, writing, communication, music production, health and fitness. There's not that many reasons left for you not to learn something in this day and age, especially if you really want to learn it. The crazy thing is that most of it will be free, well, except for your time. But hopefully it's something you enjoy doing as well. For me, it was when I started photography, and there wasn't a whiff of anything strategic or job related. I just want to take good travel photos when I went on my honeymoon and take great pictures of my daughter as she grows up. It wasn't until I started making my photos public that the imposter syndrome set in. Photography has changed a lot over the last few years, and many old school photographers are still very persnickety about what the rules of the genre may be. But I kept at it, managed even to sell some prints, had some photos featured on big photography channels on Instagram. So okay, maybe there's something to this. I kept at it. Stage 2, the mentionables. Once you've done some learning and found out some background, You can accelerate your learning, lessen the learning curve by talking to someone who's already using that skill in some way. You can start with your friends and family. Do they already know someone who's doing this? If you're also comfortable talking about this with your coworkers or your boss, you can cast a wider net again of hopefully finding someone to mentor you. For me, this was translating my photography training into making videos. Now, the two might sound similar, but there's a huge gulf between the two mediums, not to mention the potential risk of embarrassment and humiliation. None of my colleagues were making videos or wanted to make videos, and there was a few years there where it seemed like a huge waste of time. Not to mention the quality of my videos were terrible. I think one of my students called them hostage videos, like I was speaking at gunpoint for a ransom nobody wanted to pay. That's an opportune siren, I think. Speaks to the quality of the videos at that time. So nothing I made ever went public. I didn't have a channel. And of course, the imposter comes knocking. It wasn't until I connected with the media production team of my workplace just to see their workflow that I overcame that sense of insecurity, at least enough anyway. What ultimately made me keep going was stage 3 of the uncertainty framework, the Untouchables. What's untouchable at this point is this question. Is the skill you're learning one that aligns with the future direction of your job or organization? Hopefully you picked a skill that is synergistic with your current role rather than an awkward pairing. Computer coding might be really useful for everything, but maybe something like web design would be a really good fit. Graphics and animation could be useful for marketing. And in my case, photography, which turned to videography, turns out it's essential for communication and online teaching. Maybe your boss is so supportive that they'll even pay for you to have time off work to do some official training in the skill, but this will depend on how valued that skill is to them right at that moment, so pretty unlikely. Making videos and running this YouTube channel is simultaneously the most difficult and the best thing I've ever done, precisely because it aligns so well with everything I'm interested in doing for my career. So I use it for my online classes, I use it to help mentor other teachers, I leverage it to build professional networks, which has in turn led to invited talks at different conferences. Because it's so valuable in my job, I get to keep doing it, which never would have happened if A, I didn't want to feel like an imposter because I wasn't trying to learn new skills, or B, I let those feelings of insecurity initially overwhelm me. I'm already looking for the next round of insecurity, new skills to learn that build on top of these skills I already have. I'm starting a weekly newsletter, Crossover Connections on Substack, as well as a new podcast here, the Crossover Connections podcast. I'm sure they won't be very good to start with, and the imposter will come knocking yet again, but that is when I know I'm redefining my value. If you go through multiple iterative cycles in learning new skills and reinventing yourself, you will be able to invite the imposter in when it suits you and keep them at bay when you need to. Ultimately, this should lead you to phase 3, leveling up in your career. When all the value and career capital you've created for yourself leads to a new job or an enormous amount of new responsibility. This should make you feel like an imposter. Why wouldn't it? Phases 1 and 2 were no cakewalk, and you've only just figured out the rules to the game before everything has now reset. I was 10 years into academia, a decade as an associate lecturer and lecturer, quite low on the academic hierarchy, when I decided to apply for the next increment up, which is a senior lecturer. Whatever next sounds like a huge reward. I was bumped up by 2 levels, skipping senior lecturer straight to associate professor, and skipping the levels precisely because I was learning new skills that have in turn redefined my value to the point where I've leveled up twice in one go. It's really rare, and it was super exciting for a week. Then the dread set in. Academia, like many other industries, is super competitive, and I never thought I would make it this far, if I'm honest. All the rules I had been working off up to that point were to survive at the bottom of the ladder, to do the best within the constraints I've been given, to do the jobs other people don't want to do. And now I was in a position of leadership, having to find extra resources to help make those constraints a little less restrictive to other people, the older version of me. It was a totally new way of thinking, and I wasn't prepared. A few months after that promotion, I was also named Australian University Teacher of the Year during COVID. Everyone looked to me for insight and wisdom and direction about teaching in a desperate time for our sector. That does sound a little bit like first world problems, but professional reputations are a funny thing. They take decades to build up, but any sense of power or prestige is a mirage. In my field, we're only as good as our last project, publication, or presentation. All the rules are different at the next level. It's chess, not checkers, and while I'm great at following other people's instructions, I've never really had to decide what instructions to give others that would then in turn decide their career and their futures. It's a scary idea. Like clockwork, the imposter came knocking, but At that point, I made peace with this feeling of insecurity. Let's go back to our 3-stage uncertainty framework. 1. The Googleables. This became a non-starter straight away. It was useless because there are fewer people operating at the high levels of any enterprise. Naturally, there is less publicly available information, and leaders tend to hold their value close to their chest. I needed then to rely exclusively on stage 2 of the framework, the Mentionables, because leadership is all about asking the right people the right questions, having the soft skills to be adaptable in different situations, knowing the right questions to ask, having the connection to the right people. That's everything. I'm very fortunate to have met many mentors who are very generous with their time. In some way, stage 3, the Untouchables, became a moot point because at this level, nothing should be untouchable. You're part of determining that strategy for your organization. You're only effective at the next level if you know the internal politicking and backroom chatter through all the connections you've made in stage 2. This is the reason I talk so much about comfort zones, communication, and networking skills, because at a certain point, that's the entire game. You can only make the move from imposter to insider if you connect with the right people. Hopefully you're somewhere along the 3 different phases of your career and not being overwhelmed by whatever manifestation of the imposter syndrome you're experiencing. I'm Wang. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next time.